President Biden decreases airstrikes by a whopping 54%. Since the first year of taking office, the Biden-Harris administration has reduced airstrikes by a whopping 54% in 2021 and a, quote, historic low in 2022, as reported by AirWars. It also noted that President Biden has dramatically reduced, quote, U.S. military action across the globe, end quote. AirWars is a non-profit organization that keeps a record of worldwide conflict and civilian casualties due to military actions. For example, there were between 439 to 441 reported cases of U.S. airstrikes in Biden's first term, compared to 936 to 951 reported cases of U.S. airstrikes during Trump's last year in 2020. Also, under Biden, the amount of civilian casualties and fatalities have been, quote, far lower in numbers, end quote, compared to his most recent predecessor, Trump. Countries that have seen dramatic declines in airstrikes under the Biden administration include Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Somalia, and Yemen. Even though Biden has pulled U.S. military troops and warplanes out of Afghanistan after 20 years of occupation and war, some airstrikes continued in 2021. There were 372 airstrikes in 2021 compared to 660 airstrikes under Trump in 2020, a 44% decline. In Somalia, under Trump, there were 72 airstrikes in 2020, and under Biden, there were 11 in 2021, a whopping 85% decline. In 2022, 5 countries, Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Somalia, and Yemen, AirWars reported a total of 36 U.S. airstrikes under Biden. In Biden's third year in office, 2023, AirWars reported a total of 13 strikes carried out by U.S. forces and U.S.-led coalitions in Yemen, Iraq, and Syria. In Trump's third year in office, 2019, AirWars reported a total of 104 strikes carried out by U.S. forces and U.S.-led coalitions in the same countries, Yemen, Iraq, and Syria. Biden had almost an 88% decline in strikes in those countries in his third year of presidency, compared to his predecessor, Trump's third year. These numbers are some examples of reductions in bomb strikes under the Biden administration. You may be asking, where am I going with all this? Or why am I bringing this all up? Recently, Trump made unsubstantiated claims about President Biden's bomb strikes. He also said bombing the Middle East was, quote, unnecessary, despite holding record numbers of bombings himself. In early February 2024, at Mar-a-Lago, Trump told reporters, all Biden knows how to do is drop bombs all over the place. Trump further said, meaningless bombs, except they kill a lot of people. Cost a lot money. Every time you see a bomb, it's $1 million, and it actually sets us back. We had peace through strength. This should not be happening. The Middle East is blowing up. A lot of people are being killed, and it's so unnecessary. Al Jazeera, the BBC, the New York Times, and other news outlets reported that in 2017, Trump rolled back Obama-era regulations on recording the amount of civilian fatalities due to drone attacks outside of war zones, citing it as a distraction with less transparency and less accountability. It allowed the Trump administration to potentially carry out more airstrikes in secrecy. At the time, Democrat House Representative Adam Schiff stated that the policy implemented by Obama was, quote, an important measure of transparency, and there is simply no justification for ending it, end quote. BBC News, White House reporter Tara McKelvey reported that human rights advocates and policymakers have argued that Trump's choice to roll back these regulations could, quote, allow the CIA to conduct drone strikes without accountability, end quote. According to reports, in 2017, the Trump administration chose to reduce military rules that were designed to keep civilians safe from airstrikes or other militarized engagements. This, unfortunately, led to a steep rise in civilian fatalities. In an interview he conducted with Business Insider, Chris Woods, director of AirWars, said, quote, earlier on in his presidency, we saw record numbers of both airstrikes and reported civilian harm in multiple theaters, fueled by Trump's stated intent to take the gloves off against terror groups, end quote. By estimates, Trump may have dropped more bombs on Yemen than Bush and Obama combined, according to AirWars and reported by Business Insider. For example, in the first 2 years of his presidency, Trump launched 176 strikes in Yemen, whereas in all the 8 years of Obama's presidency, There were 154 strikes in Yemen, as reported by the Bureau of Investigative Journalism, the Associated Press, and the Chicago Sun-Times. Currently, Trump has dropped more bombs on Yemen than his successor, Biden. Additionally, Business Insider reported that in 2019, the Department of Defense stopped stating the amount of airstrikes it launched in Yemen, further adding to the lack of transparency. And because the Trump administration lacked open transparency, we may never really know the full extent of his strikes and civilian casualties. It was also reported that Trump's multi-billion-dollar arms deal with the Saudis led to thousands of Yemeni civilians' fatalities. According to Midas Touch Network, reports showed that Trump increased drone strikes in Syria by 400% and, quote, and stayed at that rate for his entire term, end quote. During his administration, the amount of civilian fatalities had, quote, skyrocketed, according to The Intercept and The Washington Post. The Cost of War project, spearheaded by Brown University, has been following the 20-year war in Afghanistan, and it discovered a 330% rise in the number of Afghan civilian fatalities by U.S. and allied airstrikes under the Trump administration. It is also worth mentioning that Trump dropped the mother of all bombs in Afghanistan. It is the largest and most powerful non-nuclear bomb ever used in combat. It is one of America's largest bombs. According to several references, including AlJazeera.com and Military.com, a record 7,423 U.S. bombs have been dropped in 2019 in Afghanistan under the Trump administration. And to quickly reiterate, civilian casualties in Afghanistan increased significantly under Trump. Additionally, countries like Iraq and Syria had seen the highest number of civilian casualties ever in 2017, when Trump was in office. It was reported that there were up to 6,000 civilian fatalities from bomb strikes led by the U.S. collaboration efforts in 2017, according to Air Wars, and reported by The Washington Post. That's roughly a 200% increase from the previous year when Obama was in office. It was also reported that Trump launched 52 more drone strikes in Yemen, Pakistan, and Somalia than Obama. According to Air Wars, as reported by the Middle East Research and Information Project, or MERIP under Trump, quote, drone strikes have already resulted in more civilian deaths than the entirety of strikes under the Obama administration, end quote. Under Trump, U.S. military members were also killed. It was reported that 65 U.S. troops were killed, including thousands of civilians in the countries affected by bomb strikes during his presidency. In Afghanistan alone, there were 45 combat deaths of U.S. military members and 18 non-hostile deaths, according to the Defense Casualty Analysis System as reported by the Associated Press. According to several reports, including the New York Times, the Biden administration declassified and unveiled some parts of a signed 15-page document highlighting their rules on the use of drones. In the 15-page rule document that was signed in October 2022, President Biden has implemented stricter policies for airstrikes and specialized raids. This is in stark contrast to the previous administration, which had lessened the rules. The 15-page rule document states that under most circumstances, permission must be granted by President Biden for the CIA and U.S. military to use drones to attack a suspected militant that isn't within a deemed war zone. And the drone operation must be almost certain that the drone strikes will not cause any civilian casualties. The 15-page rule document also restricts drone usage to situations where it seems almost impossible to get the intended targeted person alive with a raid. A national security memo consisting of 18 pages summarizing the Biden administration's international counterterrorism strategy was acquired by the New York Times under the Freedom of Information Act. One can presume many factors were taken into consideration while drafting these documents, including Biden's initial airstrikes, Obama's heavy use of drones, Trump's heavier and more aggressive use of drones, and lack of transparency, and let's not forget the tens of thousands of civilian casualties and fatalities that resulted from years and decades of bomb strikes. There is a lot of controversy surrounding the use of air drones to attack suspected targets and terrorists, as they have also led to innocent lives being lost. Some would argue that weapons like guns, detonators, tanks, explosives, grenades, and on-the-ground military combat led to more civilian casualties, but that would have to be a discussion for another day. Drone strikes are meant to hit the intended suspected target while reducing the number of civilian casualties and military combat forces on the ground. And while research shows that, generally, they do reduce large numbers of Casualties. Unfortunately, they never fully protect civilians from their wrath. Due to the nature of this video, I can't delve too much into drones and their history, as this would end up turning into a 3-hour video. This video was made in response to Trump's recent baseless public statements about Biden at his Mar-a-Lago estate. Going back to Trump's statements at Mar-a-Lago, it's quite odd to make such bold, unsubstantiated claims about the Biden-Harris administration when his bomb strikes and civilian casualties and fatalities numbers exceeded that even of Obama. Trump dethroned Obama as the drone king and currently holds that title. We cannot deny the fact that Obama has had numerous bomb strikes and civilian casualties during his administration. But based on the information provided and reports available, it appears that Trump has had far more bomb strikes and civilian casualties during his administration, even beating out his predecessor Obama, and definitely far outpacing his successor. And let's not forget, Trump's administration was far less transparent about their bomb strikes than Obama and Biden. So, it goes without saying, Donald Trump is in absolutely no position to speak about or criticize others. He should not throw stones from a glass house. This concludes our video. If you have managed to watch it until the end, we thank you. If this video has been helpful to you, liking this video and subscribing to our channel would mean a lot to us. What that does for us is it gives us an indication that we are building an audience and that we are creating helpful content for our viewers.